Hello everyone, welcome to the Scumdog's Kennel. I'm your host, Chris Williams, and in today's Cryptid Corner mini-episode, today we're going to be looking at the Bear Lake Monster. I have a couple of stories delving into this lake monster mystery, folks, and we're going to have some fun. Let's get into the article titled, The Bear Lake Monster, America's Forgotten Nessie, Monsters Terror of the Utah-Idaho Border, and read exactly what happened in these two stories where the witnesses encountered this thing. The Bear Lake Monster is a cryptid featured in the local folklore of Bear Lake located on the Utah-Idaho border. The myth originated from articles written in the 19th century by Joseph C. Rich, a Mormon colonizer in the area. Colonizer, huh? You mean basically settler. Either way, he who claimed to report secondhand accounts of sightings of the creature, it seems he may have been inspired by the tales of the Loch Ness Monster from his native Scotland, thinking that America needed its own Nessie. However, he later recanted these stories. In recent years, the monster has become a tourist attraction, with the last reported sighting occurring in 2007. Here's the first story, folks. Bear Lake, Idaho, September 12, 1907. Editor, Logan Republican. We camped on the eastern shore of Bear Lake just after sundown. After getting our horses tied to a large tree near the water's edge and fed, we started to prepare our supper. My partner, Mr. Horn, called my attention to something out in the lake about a half-mile away. As we watched, it would sink into the water for a second, then out again. The lake being perfectly calm, we couldn't account for the strange object, but it drew nearer to us and continued to sink and disappear under the water. Had it not been for this, we would have thought it a gasoline launch or some other vessel. It was now close enough for us to see that it was some water monster. We grabbed our 30 rifles, and each of us fired at it, but could not see that we hit him. Although he turned slightly to the south before we had time to fire again, he turned towards us. Our horses were now terrified, and one of them broke loose. We stepped back into the trees a few feet and both fired, and my God, for the growl that beast let, then started towards us like a mad elephant. We ran up the hillside a few rods to a cliff of rocks and then began to shoot as rapidly as possible. With every shot, he seemed to get more strength and growl more devilishly. The animal was now so close to shore that we couldn't see it for the trees. We thought of our horse that was tied to the tree, and after reloading our guns, we ran down to protect him. If possible, just as we reached our campfire, which was blazing up pretty well, we could see that ugly monster raise its front paw and strike the horse to the ground. Then he turned and began to head for the deep water. In our excitement, we began to pour lead at him again, and then, with a terrific growl, made a terrible swish in the water and sprang toward us. Before we could move, he grabbed the horse with his two front paws, opened its monstrous mouth, and crushed its teeth into it like a bull terrier would a moose. After tearing the horse badly, he made an awful howl and then was gone, plowing through the water. But the sight I'll never forget. It seemed to be all head, two large staring eyes as large as a front wagon wheel, nose and mouth like a great large fish. Its arms seemed to come out on either side of its head, where the ears naturally would be. The hind legs were long and bent like those of the kangaroo. Then the hind end was like the tip end of a monster fish. Now, the Bear Lake Monster truly sounds like it's a Frankensteinian combination of different animals and creatures, doesn't it, folks? That alone would basically put me on edge, thinking that this was just a tall tale. The fact that the original author basically recanted in later years these stories, yeah, I would have suspected before then that this was just a tall tale and a hoax, folks. But either way, I can understand why he wanted to do it. He wanted to give America its own Nessie. Either way, it was not a bad thing to do here, folks. Though I, myself, and other basically people who delve into weird stories don't like the idea of basically making up stories like this. It's a little better than basically just, making up tall tales like creepypastas, stories you read online. One guy, Creepy Little Book, he said that he feels that creepypastas muddy the waters from real UFO research and paranormal accounts to basically fake ones. But that was his statement, folks, and his beliefs. Either way, let's finish off the story now. We walked to our ranch up the shore a quarter of a mile and stayed till morning. When we went back in the morning, we found the animal had come back again in the night and carried the dead horse off. He also broke off trees 4 and 5 inches through. Also tore large holes in the beach, and its tracks were like those of a bear, but measuring 3 feet long and nearly 2 feet wide. We could not tell if our bullets would go through his hide or not, but we noticed some of them would glance off and hum like they had struck one of his teeth, which always seemed to show, as there was so much blood from the mangled horse. We could not tell whether the beast of the lake was bleeding. Yours respectively, T.R. Mooney and Fred Horn. Very interesting story, folks, but it's a little better than a creepypasta. But it seems like the story, well, resembles various other tall tales and stories from around those times, folks. Either way, it was still worth reading. Let's get on to the next story. Then there is this account published in the Montana Post, Virginia City, Montana Territory, April 23rd, 1869. Utah papers have, during the last year, broadly discussed the existence of giant amphibious monsters in Bear Lake, Utah. However, we are not aware that a definitive conclusion has yet been reached. A belief in monsters of the named character in Sakuchi Lake, located in the San Luis Valley, prevails among a large portion of the Mexican residents in the vicinity and has recently extended to the Americans. It is confidently affirmed that these animals, surpassing in size the largest alligators, have been repeatedly seen and have been known to devour grown cattle that were grazing on the banks of the lake. This story is not of recent origin. Mexicans from the earliest settlements of the valley have roundly asserted the existence of such monsters. There, as the lake is remote from the settlements, the chances of observation are rare, except by herders. They are, without exception, implicit believers in the existence of these nameless monsters. The story is a curious one. A variety of amphibious animals that were once thought to be extinct may have survived in Bear or Sakuchi. Without announcing our full belief in the story, we may remark its prevalence is hard to account for unless it has some foundation in fact. Residents would also describe the Bear Lake monster apparently as a combination of fish, bear, and a dragon, folks. So, that's interesting to know about, folks. I would imagine that basically after this guy, the original writer of this, book, talking about basically the Bear Lake monster, other people began seeing it, folks, as a kind of hysteria, or basically tried to get in on the act and basically just gave more details to it, folks. In fact, people would continue to see this monster until 2007 or so, from the first sighting that took place in the early 1800s. So people were seeing this thing, folks, but it wasn't exactly a real monster. But maybe they were seeing something. Identified large, maybe eel species, perhaps? Because remember, folks, most of these lakes where people have seen lake monsters or river monsters, they found eel DNA. I can imagine that basically after this guy made up the Bear Lake monster, folks, people began seeing something, but it was really something like a large, unidentified eel, probably. Most likely. Either way, it's something to wonder about, folks. Either way, I do believe that there are things out there, maybe especially in the ocean, folks, but bear and, lake monsters like this probably just don't exist for the most part. Then again, I'm open to the idea that maybe there are monsters in the rivers and lakes of the world, folks. Perhaps maybe connecting to channels to the inner earth and something comes out, perhaps. But then again, we can't be for sure. All I can do is just wonder about that fact, folks. Either way, the Bear Lake monster, while not a real cryptid, it's still worth looking at for the history and story behind it, folks. How it affected basically people's idea about basically lake monsters in America, folks. And the fact that it does have a relationship with the Loch Ness monster. At least the original creator of this story basically knew about the old story of the Loch Ness monster from, hundreds of years ago, folks. Because remember, the Bear Lake monster was created in the early 1800s, hundreds of years or so after the original Loch Ness monster story was known. But well before the 1930s, when basically people became aware of the more recent sightings of the Loch Ness monster, folks. So that is something that's very interesting. Either way, folks, we're now at the end, so please go subscribe to my YouTube channel, Read Comics, They're Bad For You. You can use the YouTube link down below in the descriptions of the chat to go subscribe to me. Hit that like button for me. Make sure you're still subscribed. Leave some comments down below. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure at the part of the bell they give you all future notifications, and please share this video out. I'm Chris Williams from the Scumdogs Kennel. Thank you all for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow with another great video. So be sure to come back again then. Till next time, folks, I'll see you all again soon.